Hi, welcome. It's that time. This is Karen Launchbaugh. I'm going to kind of let a few people still get in. And welcome to the Fall Forum, the evening session. Great to have you. People are still joining. If you were here for the afternoon session, I really thought it was great. I'm going to give you a little bit of flavor of some of the things that we did, and then we'll move into this evening session. But again, thank you for coming. You know, it seems it's the new world we're in, and we're certainly doing well by it. So again, I'm the director of the Rangeland Center, and I'm really happy you're here. And tonight is going to be a chance to really think on what we learned and how we might change. Okay, so remember the theme of the Fall Forum is review, reimagine, reposition. We're in the reimagine part. We reviewed a little in the previous section, and we had Wendy and Seth Pratt. So mother and son family, they ranch out of Blackfoot, and we asked them what had changed in ranching in their lives. And of course, they have two generations of opinion or of ideas, and a couple things that struck me. And our speakers tonight may want to follow up on some of these, but the one real common theme was that the cows and the range have stayed roughly the same over those years. Okay, they've got weeds, and it seems to be getting more shrub dominated and less grass, but a lot of the operation is the same. What's really changed is the people there's way more public use of lands, and there's people that are infringing on old driveways where they had cattle. So the ranchers of today are really struggling. They're still struggling with the operation, and they still have all their operational challenges, but now they have these new challenges that are related to human encroaching into rangelands and using rangelands for recreation. So that was another interesting point. I thought Seth Pratt made a really good point about COVID. We saw a lot of people, because they were so stuck to their screens and they were stuck in the house, we had a lot more use of public lands this year. And so that was, I think, encouraging. In a way, it might have been problematic for people. Maybe they didn't get the campsite they liked, or they saw more people out there. But on the other hand, there's a lot more people that are out there enjoying rangelands. So that's the upside. There's a downside, but it is nice to see people out on the range. And then the third take-home message that I got, kind of theme, went into the presentation that Tim Prather and Glenn Shoemaker had, which is how important history is. We don't live in one point in time. We live on a scale that is one point in time, but has a history to it. So Wendy brought it up. I loved what she said. She said, we need to really think about what this was like historically, not just what it's like today. And Glenn Shoemaker gave us some beautiful examples of how the range has changed. So that's why we made it through review. And now, so we know the world's changed. We know there's new pressures on range. We know we live in a new environment. So how do we reposition ourselves? And that's tonight's theme. I just want to make sure that you know before we get going that would love to have you chat at the bottom of the bar if you have some questions. Eric Winford, the all-capable Associate Director of the Range Center, is doing all the work behind the scenes. So Eric, thank you. He's watching the chat. If you have a question or a comment, he can handle that. Or it might be Q&A for you. I'm not sure if it's chat or Q&A. And then also want to thank Crystal Callahan. She is also running the ship behind the scenes. So thanks to both of you for keeping us going. And now we're all on the way, and we have two great speakers tonight. Katherine, you're unmuted. You're there. So wave. And I want to say that getting to know you has been really great. There's this, I think, really interesting relationship between the Rangeland Center, who tries to bring science to the range, and the McClure Center for Public Policy Research that really tries to say, well, how do policies influence that? So Katherine, you've been in Idaho a few years. We're really happy to have you. You have a very international and policy-driven career, and we saw that in the kind of cliff notes for tonight's session. But I want to thank you, and I want to start with you and have you introduce Mark. So please tell us a little bit more about yourself and McClure Center, and then we'll move forward.
Karen, thanks so much. The McClure Center is really delighted to partner with the Rangeland Center. I think this is our 4th year really connecting policy with the range. And so it's just a thrill, even though we're not getting our boots dirty, we're not together at the dinner that typically happens the evening of the Thursday program. But as Karen mentioned, my background is international, it is in science policy. But I will mention that when I was in Central Asia for some of my work, I was out there on the sagebrush steppe. So it's great to be here in Idaho on the sagebrush steppe. My role tonight is to introduce our keynote, Mark Brunson, and to really get you, our audience, thinking about how we reimagine range. And that's the focal point of Mark's talk. So I'm going to introduce Mark briefly, and then I'm going to come back, and Mark and I are going to have a little interactive Q&A before we ask you to really put on your thinking caps. So this morning's session was listening, really whetting your appetite with Revisit. But this evening, we're going to ask you to do a lot of thinking and listening to Mark and me. And then you're going to go out into these breakout sessions, and you're going to tell us what you think. And so these will be lively and interactive, and we have some great facilitators. So first, though, I'm going to introduce Mark. Mark Brunson is a professor in the Environment and Society Department at Utah State University. His research and teaching focuses on the dynamics of coupled human-natural systems, especially in deserts and rangeland. He's really interested in the causes and consequences of human behaviors in natural environments, and his research in particular focus on how we make decisions after rangeland fires. So Mark, we really want to welcome you to this year's Fall Forum, and we're eager to listen to your remarks on Reimagine.
Great. Well, thanks, Catherine, and hopefully I'm going to try and share some slides, and if so far everything's worked really well, so maybe it's my chance to screw things up, but we'll see. So is that working?
It's perfect, Mark.
Perfect, excellent. Okay, so thanks, Catherine, and thanks to all of you. I see some friendly faces, or at least names on the screen earlier, and folks that I hope will enjoy this talk. You know, when Karen reached out to me at first, she just said, you know, we want you to reimagine range management. And I thought, well, how am I going to do that? You know, there's an awful lot of things there. And so I decided to focus in specifically on public grazing land management. And I chose this slide to introduce us. I took this actually on Saturday, and some of you will remember it wasn't a very nice day. This was taken in Power County, Idaho. And I wanted the gray clouds because I think some of us are seeing storm clouds on the horizon and we're not entirely sure how to address them. And so I want us to think a little bit about what we might do. And so I want specifically to think about this. When I talk with ranchers in Utah and I ask them specifically, I'm focusing quite a bit right now on drought adaptation, climate change adaptation. And one of the things that permittees tell us, they really would like to have more flexibility from their federal partners. Okay, so what would that do for them? Well, it might allow them, for example, to adjust their turnout dates to reflect the conditions on the ground. If the climate is changing, if we have an early spring, wouldn't it be useful to be able to turn out early, knowing that there's a good chance in a warmer climate that they might have to come down off the mountain earlier? It might offer more opportunities as well to increase stocking if the situation allows. Right now, it's a heck of a lot easier to reduce stocking for a year than it is to increase stocking to meet particular conditions. Producers would like more protection against the negative consequences of wildfire for their ability to get forage. And that might entail a temporary combination of allotments. It might entail some other kind of boundary adjustments. Right now, we do not have the capacity to do that. So I was thinking, well, what if they could do that? But before we do, we really need to think about why we can't. So why isn't this happening now? And it's not because you've got a bunch of stodgy people in the field offices and in the ranger districts that just don't want to do anything different. You know, often they would like to be more adaptive, but they're encountering barriers higher up in the organization or outside of the organization. There tend to be disincentives for line officers to try something new. You know, if your goal is to continue to advance your career and you do something that seemed like an interesting idea and it didn't work because it was novel and tried, and that means you are transferred laterally instead of upwards, then that's a challenge for you and something you might want to avoid. The policies that we have are not designed to reflect the best science as it constantly evolves. They're designed for judicial review, and judicial review is based on case law that has evolved. So it's basically backward looking. You know, have you followed all the rules as defined by case law that has happened in the past? And then there are political pressures, and those pressures, depending on who's in the administration, they may be coming from one side or another, but you know, Congress, interest groups, highest up people in the agencies are all pushing pressure downward to try and get people not to do some things that might be politically difficult. And then on top of that, there really is a legacy of past management. You know, many of the things that were done in the past were done, and I'm talking in many cases, long distant past. They were done because of lack of information, because we didn't have the information or people didn't understand what they were supposed to be doing. There have been times when even under multiple use laws, the management has been cattle biased. And so as a result, that's created a distrust that has caused a lot of people to call for more rigidity in regulation. So how do we get rid of that rigidity? What would that mean? Well, in order to have a more flexible future, I would say we have to first recognize that the grazing rules we have now are there to balance public interests, the interests of all the various kinds of stakeholders, and private interests, the interests of the permittee, and those balances taking place in an atmosphere of mistrust. And so in order to maintain that balance, given that mistrust, any increased flexibility is going to have to be paired with increased transparency. People have to be able to see what's going on. They have to be able to look behind the curtain and see why decisions are made and what's happening once those decisions are made. So what would a transparent flexibility look like? How could we use that to build resilience capacity? Well, I can imagine that one of the things that would certainly have to do is a very much ramped up emphasis on monitoring. Monitoring is important, we all recognize that, but often, for example, if it's done by seasonal employees, you end up, you know, if there's a budget crunch, you end up cutting the seasonals because that's the easiest thing to do, or there might be other challenges. And so we need more monitoring, not you know, as little as we can get away with. And that's going to mean more resources devoted to monitoring. It's going to, and those resources will include money, and hopefully, you know, there would be a recognition on the part of the folks at the top of the agencies and on the part of the Congress that more money was needed for this. But it also means people who may be paid, people who may not be paid. I'll come back to that. And it's going to mean technology. It means applying new high-tech methods alongside low-tech field approaches. So at the same time, we're talking about using unmanned aerial systems or new kinds of remote sensing that we're not even, you know, really just barely on the horizon as of now, along with simply having people out there ground truthing. And it's going to mean probably monitoring in some cases collaboratively with those people who don't trust the monitoring data that are there now. And in order to make that work, it's going to also involve the engagement with neutral parties that may or may not be part of a monitoring situation now. So it means more people. It might even mean that not only are we sharing collaboratively monitoring, but we're also collaboratively making decisions about grazing strategy. There's an interesting project that I'm been aware of for a while now in northeastern Colorado, where the USDA Agricultural Research Service, the Nature Conservancy, and ranchers and some other stakeholders have been testing out what happens when you have collaborative grazing management. And then they're comparing it to business as usual to see what happens. And there's been some interesting things coming out of that. I also think that in order to be able to be more flexible, you're going to have grass banking. There's going to have to be places where you can move your animals in the instant when there's something that happens, whether it's a fire, whether it's another kind of disturbance, whether it's something to do with drought. So how might rangeland stewardship change if we actually did that? Well, as I mentioned, it's going to need more frequent interaction with outsiders, including outsiders that we're not sure we really want to hang out with. You know, open door collaboration is going to be messy, but being inclusive might have some benefits. So I think about in Utah, we have an environmental organization that, that tries to be science-based. And so one of the things that they've been doing is they've been doing their own monitoring. For years, they go out onto allotments and they monitor independently of what might be going on with the BLM or the permittee, and they get different results. And many of us think that the reason they get different results is because they're not using the appropriate techniques. But nonetheless, wouldn't it maybe work better if you could, you know, work collaboratively? They could see why what they were doing may not be as useful as what the agency is doing. At the same time, the agency and could be able to see what it is about what's going on in the allotment that's really causing concern for the environmental group. In order to do that, you're going to need to involve organizations. I mentioned neutral partners. We're going to have different roles for bridging organizations. There may be nonprofits. Some of those exist now. There's a new Idaho Rangeland organization, which I've forgotten the name of, I apologize. The Quivira Coalition, you know, if we're down further south, not in Idaho. Extension, a new role for extension. Already in Arizona, University of Arizona uses extension to do monitoring on the Arizona Strip. There may also need to be liaison positions within the agency offices, because when you think about it, our field level personnel don't really have a whole lot of bandwidth to add in working, you know, all this collaborative and keeping people together. So there might be new jobs whose role is to be engaged with outreach, maintaining lines of communication between various stakeholders and with permittees, and also with the public generally. One, you know, if you're a producer and you need to put more effort into monitoring, maybe one thing to do would be create some kind of an agritourism or you know, I guess listening to Seth this morning, it didn't sound like for some people, agritourism isn't the way they really want to take advantage of recreation interests, but maybe at least having some sort of a volunteer sort of citizen science or citizen monitoring effort that in exchange for some kinds of hosting activities and some benefits of learning more about the ranch and figuring out how to make that happen. As I mentioned, we need to figure out how to reward higher level officers, field office managers and above for innovation. That means the agency and outsiders, Congress and interest groups must be willing to accept failure. And the reason why they can do that is because if we reverse course quickly, which we can do if we're monitoring, we can see failures starting to happen in real time, then we may be able to turn the battleship, maybe not on a dime, but at least on a Susan B. Anthony dollar. And we can reduce, you know, at the same time, we need to reduce incentives for business as usual. There's going to be a requirement for greater technology skills. And probably those are not only going to be in the agency, they're almost surely not going to only be, you know, with rancher families. So it's going to probably involve the private sector. There are consulting firms already who use these kinds of techniques. I know in Nevada, for example, there's quite a bit of that going on. But in order to do that, someone's going to have to pay the cost. You know, it might come out of agency budgets, but I'm skeptical. I think it also might mean grazing fees would go up. All right, now that sounds, wait a second, profit margins are already pretty low. But one of the reasons why I think that might be okay is because it makes it easier to keep some allotments vacant to allow the flexibility. Excuse me. Now, when we have fewer permittees, that means that we have, there may be opportunities to take advantage of vacant allotments. It also has some interesting economic effects. It might, for example, raise the value of a permit. It might raise the value of the ranch. That has tax implications. Your taxes might go up. It has sale implications. You might be more attractive to sell out if you're under certain circumstances. But one of the things that does then is potentially, instead of simply, trying to find a new person for that allotment, maybe that becomes a vacant allotment or a grass bank. And finally, and I know this is going to be hard, but we might need to see more effort, more put into punishing poor compliance. We have permittees out there, not necessarily in Idaho, but in neighboring states that, for example, haven't paid grazing fees in 30 years. Trying to figure out how to make that, put teeth into that would be valuable. So those are some of the things that I can imagine. And what I really would like to know is what you can imagine. So I'll bring you back to a different part of Idaho. This is the north end of the Curlew National Grassland. It was a beautiful day, and that's what I hope this will lead us toward, is a beautiful day for range management.
Mark, thanks so much for walking us through how to reimagine range. I have a couple of questions for you before we take our participants and put them in these breakout rooms to do exactly as you said, to hear what you think. And so, my first question for you, you mentioned some of these neutral parties, if you will. You gave a few examples, and it would be wonderful to hear a little bit more. I know you mentioned Quivira. When you and I spoke earlier I guess it was last month, you spoke about Northeast Colorado, the Nature Conservancy working there. So it'd just be great to hear a little bit more about how those collaborative approaches, those neutral configurations, what that might look like.
Well, the Nature Conservancy is an interesting example. They have preserves in Idaho. They own ranches, and they own ranches in order to try and seek solutions that will keep working people on the land at the same time that that they're improving management and sustaining ecosystem services. So they're one of the kinds of organizations. There are a couple other people that we think of as environmental groups, but have that. I think about organizations like Quivira, maybe Western Landowners Alliance, but I think there might be new organizations. One of the things that I've discovered, like I'm working with a doctoral student right now who wants to be a boundary spanner. That's specifically his, he envisions a career where he uses his understanding of range science and social science in order to be able to achieve what I just said, to sustain healthy landscapes and to sustain healthy communities in a landscape that involves livestock operation as well as others. And so I can imagine people like him actually starting new nonprofits that we don't even know about, and they could be part of the solution.
Mark, that was terrific. I loved this term boundary spanner. I've heard it in really different circles, so I'm so delighted that it's come to the range and that you're also talking about boundary spanners here. Thanks for describing what that might look like. I also want to ask a question. You talked about these innovative positions, and you gave some examples, and I know that we're going to ask the participants to really think what it could look like from their perspective, but do you have one or two that just really are top of mind for you? Something that when you heard about it, you said, aha, this is how we can reimagine range.
Well, you did mention, and I talked a little bit about it as well, as this CARM project in Northeast Colorado that was organized by organized by the Agricultural Research Service, and then they brought in stakeholders such as Nature Conservancy. Another one that I think is really interesting is there's a new partnership it's something called Ecosystem Services Marketplace, where there might be payments for ecosystem services. That's a collaborative effort that, they're mostly focusing on private land, but at some point I can imagine that in our part of the country, we really need to think about how you can encourage ecosystem service provision on private, incentivize ecosystem service provision on public lands, and in ways that involve some of these other partners in the situations. And there was another one in my head, but it's come out of it again. So maybe I'm sure that other people can think of cool ideas.
Right, we can always share it at the very end of this session when we talk about what we heard in our different breakout rooms. I'm sure it will come back by then. So I'm going to ask one more question before we send everyone into these breakout rooms. And so my question is, we talk about reimagining range, and you spoke about these new positions. Some are here and some are coming. But so often, when we think about what things could look like 2 years from now, 5 years from now, and then we get really busy working on that, it takes us a long time to get there. And sometimes that is obsolete, right? It takes us 2 years, 5 years to build this plan, and then we get 5 years down the road and we have to already think about the next 5 years. So can you talk about, with everything you described, what might be some ways we avoid doing that? How can we sort of leapfrog into the future?
The pessimist in me says we need to change human nature. I think about, we've spent 5 years building this plan, and we had to go through this NEPA, and we got appealed, and we got, now we've got the plan. By golly, we're going to use it, even though it's no longer fitting the conditions. One of the things that I think is, if we do, in fact, use monitoring, and we use technology to make the monitoring data more transparent, and that means making it available, maybe not in real time, but much more quickly, and using new computer visualization techniques to be able to make it so people can more quickly understand what the data are saying, then it allows us to be able to see, even while we're working on the plan, how we might be off in different directions. So essentially what we're doing is we're following, it's kind of like having a GPS telling you, whoops, you missed your turn. And that's really, I think, that's kind of what we need, is those kinds of technologies, or those kinds of people who have that role, or specifically said, you're in charge of scouting the horizon and making sure we're on the right path. That, through those kinds of things, I think we might be able to adjust on the fly, if that's built into the rules that we use to design the planning process.
Mark and Catherine, I think that you guys have laid out some really good ideas, and I am going to now kind of lay out how we're going to go to the next stage. And so if that works, I'm going to go ahead. Yeah, good. Sure. I like the idea, Mark, that maybe we'd have someone that said, oops, you made the wrong turn, but what if we could even get ahead of it and say, hey, turn left here? So I think a good planning process will do that. Mark, since we talked about this, I've been thinking about what it takes to make change. And so we're going to ask you to go into these breakout rooms and be creative. Let's think about what's out there and how it could. It's an idea of what if we could do this. My 4 points, and when I see people, I'm animal behaviors, when people make change. One is, some people are just more open-minded than others. It's just more creative. And I take that, like, I often ask my class, which animals are the ones to find new resources in an ecosystem? It's the young heifers. It's the young females. They're more open-minded in terms of finding resources. And there's people in our communities that are that way. So one is open-minded. Another one is to get ideas from somewhere else. So you've given us some good examples. Maybe we could think about taking those and putting them in our community. I think in Idaho, a good example is the Range Fire Protection Associations. They've been very effective. They came out of forestry. So something was happening in forestry and brought them here. Another one was brought up by Wendy Pratt today about bringing women into the equation, bringing diverse communities, young, old, urban. And so although it's uncomfortable, you pointed that out, that's where new innovations come from. And the last one is, unfortunately, we find new innovation when we're up against the wall. And when you just don't have a lot of choices, you know, necessity is the mother of invention. So let's hope you guys are not up against a wall, but here's what's gonna happen. Crystal is going to put us into different workout or different discussion groups. It's going to be random. You won't have a choice. You're just going to end up in a discussion group. And the leaders will be Mark and Katherine and me and Tim Prather and Eric Winford. So we're kind of leaders. We have assistants with us to kind of listen and make sure we're hearing what's going on. And we've got a couple questions for you. And we really want your innovative and creative ideas. So Crystal, whenever you're ready to hit the button, we're ready for you. Go. I'm saying really smart things. I just want you to know that. Okay, I hope you guys had as good a discussions as we did in our group. Some things I didn't know. And I'm going to now just go around to the group moderators and maybe their assistants. And let's just hear a little bit about some of the collaborations and some of the technologies that were going on in your rooms. Katherine, could I start with you? Let's start with that first question about the what if and collaboration. What are some of the themes that showed up for you?
You know, we talked about if we do that, we will have happy ranchers and happy range. So we had people thinking about the real long term. What's that end game? We talked a little bit about the urban-rural connection, but I really want to share this point. When Mark mentioned these boundary spanners, when we talk about Idaho, we know who they are, but they're like sprinkled across the state. And wouldn't it be great if they could be somehow connected more formally? So it's this idea of institutionalizing innovation.
Say more, institutionalizing innovation. I'll go to Mark next, so say more on that. Katherine, what do you mean? Just tell me a little bit more about what you mean about institution.
So if we know in Idaho who are the boundary spanners, but they're just sprinkled, right? They're in different organizations, different lines of work, but how do they actually come together in a more formal fashion? How, you know, what is the umbrella that unites them? And how do we sort of institutionalize that innovation? How do we bring it together so it's not just my informal phone call to this person or go having, you know, a talk in the field with that person?
I think, Mark, the group that you were trying to think of earlier was the Idaho Rangeland Conservation Partnership, and that might be the job. That would be a great job for them. So that's a great one. I'll pass it along to Brenda. Mark, so what was happening in your group?
Well, in our group, when we talked about collaboration, one of the first things we thought about was, well, you know, this is quite a change for people to have new people looking over their shoulder, you know. And in the agencies, it's pointed out that they often have people looking over their shoulder, but they're looking from afar and they're looking with a negative, you know, sort of starting point. And so there may be opportunities through collaboration to make that work. In the discussion about collaboration, we got off on the topic of grass banking and the fact that I was not, the way I interpreted it, it wasn't how it was said, but it occurred to me that I was not being nearly so imaginative in thinking about grass banking, because there might be ways to do that within the allotment through the way we design rotations and some other things, rather than trying to ask people to suddenly move their animals, you know, halfway across, you know, 50 or 100 miles in the middle of the summer to be able to get someplace else. So those were two of the themes that came out. Then we talked about the second prompt. We pretty much stuck with technology. We really didn't get past that one. We talked quite a bit about what we wish the technology would do that it doesn't. We would really like to be able to find.
Mark, can I come back on technology?
Yeah.
Let's go through collaboration first, or was this part of collaboration?
No, let's go. We can do it that way. I thought we were doing, yeah.
Yeah, let's go that direction. Let's see,
Oh,
Faith,
great.
I'm going to move on to Tim right after your comment.
Okay, the other part that we talked about in collaboration was in the academic setting to help build those communication skills and the critical thinking skills in the students to be able to work in the field of rangeland management, which faces, you know, lots of contentious issues. And so then there was, and partnerships was also part of those comments there. That's it.
I'm happy to say that I had a very good, healthy discussion about wild horses in my class yesterday, and we learned about how to collaborate. Tim Prather, I am sure you had a healthy discussion over some invasive weed or something, but tell us about collaboration. I think invasive species has been the heart of collaboration.
I hate to disappoint you, but we didn't talk about weeds at all. So, yeah, that's unfortunate for you, I know. But Karen hates to ride in a vehicle with me because I show her everything that's wrong.
It's depressing. It's terribly depressing. But go ahead. Tell us what was exciting in your group, Tim.
So with respect to collaboration, there was some really good discussion. There is some experience with citizen science programs, and some of that is related to Survey 123 as a technology. There's some others that have been utilized. One of the challenges can be quality of the photographs, and so there may be some things that could be improved. Another point that was made was that through these efforts at trying to help with the monitoring, it provides people that don't have that common experience on range to get that experience and learn about it, become invested, and really have some ownership over that. So seeing some real advantages to people participating in efforts that are at a local scale and going out and helping with some of these efforts, and really finding that they value and enjoy those rangelands more. And then the other aspect of collaboration came from Jim Sprinkle with his time in Arizona, where they actually did the same thing that Mark was talking about, where they did have people that were out on the range, and that was run through extension. And he found that was really quite helpful in seeing where some of that information that they developed started to show up in NEPA. The other thing that Jim pointed out was that having more boots on the ground and doing this sort of work, you have more people invested in it, and in terms of the inertia of overcoming the resistance to change, that you have more people that are advocating for change. And so when you look at outcome-based management, that you've got a greater group of people that are interested in pushing that forward. And so he's looking at moving from glacial movement to something that's maybe a little faster than that.
Okay, no, that's great. I think the idea of citizen science, I never thought of it as collaboration, but it's right at the heart of there. Eric, if you were keeping track, you would realize that you're the next group I was going to call in. So wherever you are, Eric, there you are. Got it.
Great, thanks, Karen. Yeah, we had a great conversation. We kind of immediately went into the collaboration thing and just the importance of collaboration at building trust. And we talked a lot about this and how important trust is to these ideas, and how important trust is and how transparency builds trust, and how that's essential to achieving these mutual goals. And one came up was the university's Rinker Rock Creek Ranch, and that's a very collaborative operation with involving a lot of groups, and I think is a good example of some of this that might be going on. But it takes a lot of time, and that was the other part that was brought up. It takes time, and we definitely need to incentivize agency folks sticking around and find ways to bring them along, and maybe allow them to understand and learn their area so that they're as familiar with it as some of the longtime ranchers who've been on the land for a while. But technology can help with that trust, and so drones and remote imagery can help. And could potentially help with that transparency and that trust building issue, because ultimately the monitoring has to link to the outcomes, and But to kind of wrap it back around, we have to agree on what those outcomes should be too. So that kind of is, we kind of talked in a circle a little bit, I think, but it was a beautiful circle there.
In that trust, and something you do at Rock Creek that I know is when you have the communal science, when everybody's trying to get the science together and agrees that that's an important thing that we could agree on, whether I like cows and you don't or whatever, as long as we're trying to get that same information. I think Cameron Mulrooney is on here too. The Idaho Cattle Association has been a major partner of this grouse and grazing project, and everyone involved in that just wants the answer. We don't know what it's going to be, but if you keep seeking together. So that sounds like it was a great discussion. Our group had only a couple of things to add to that. We talked more about respect than trust. Trust is a part of that, but we talked about the Quivira Coalition and a few other organizations where they're really a lot of respect. You can come in there from being any hat on and be respected for your opinion. And so that's something that is required. We had some good discussion about forest collaboratives like the Idaho Forest Restoration Partnership, where groups of innovators then come together in a larger group. So maybe going back to your institutionalizing innovation, trying to share ideas that come. And then the last discussion, one of the people in our group just was asked, how do you start these collaborations? And that's tough. It takes someone has to be brave and has to pick up the phone and call someone and have a cup of coffee. And so we just want to find a way to make those one-on-one collaborations that could grow. So we didn't have a lot to add. Let's move on to technology, because you guys dipped a little bit into it. I'm going to go in the same order. Katherine, what was your grouping talking about with technology?
Well, Karen, I think we talked about old-fashioned technology communicating. Oh, that one. So, we talked about the importance of seeing things in the field. What if you have a policy that says you can't cut until something's 4 inches tall, but the thing's never going to grow to 4 inches tall? That's not going to work. We also talked about with all the growth here, all the people coming to Idaho and the use of public land. Do they know the impact of fire, not so much on the land, but on what is grazing on the land? And and that it's not just grasses or things that kind of look dead. So we talked about the importance of communication, informing policy, but I think really, even though we didn't frame it in our group as communication as a technology, I think that was this tacit center of our conversation.
Well, when you said technology, everyone was shaking their heads. Yeah, I mean, when you said communication, and so Gretchen might bring us around to that tomorrow, because I know that's a passion of hers. Okay, Mark, what was your group thinking about with technology? Is it going to save the world?
Well, we thought about what we wish technology would do, but it doesn't do yet. And so, things like see under the canopy. Another one is find weeds that we don't know are there yet. One of the challenges that happens is we've got lots of ground to cover, and we don't have the capacity to monitor all of it. So, the ability to be able to use technology for that, whether it's, UAVs or something else, would be part of it. That sort of led us into some thoughts about whether people, others than, whether collaboratively you could be monitoring. It's something that Seth Pratt said this afternoon was, about the possibility of training ATV operators to know weeds so that they could report them sooner. But, we talked about using apps like EdMaps as a possibility. And then the last point, which is really more of a science question than a technology question, but it has to do with weeds, and Tim will put you on this one. We need to know, this will be the rest of your career, right? We need to know which, some of these weeds that we're putting a lot of effort into might eventually integrate themselves into the community and not become dominant. Others of them will dominate. And so to the extent to which science can help us in this part of the country understand that, using information from places where the weed might have been established much sooner, that would be a real help to people. And that's, I'm not sure, that's not really technology, it's not conservation practice or policy, but it would be valuable.
Cool, yeah. Well, that puts Tim on the spot. I think there are a lot of technologies that have changed for weeds. Tim, I don't know if you guys talked about weeds, maybe, Tim?
No, we didn't, but
Why do we have an invasive species specialist then?
I know. Well, there's other things that are interesting in life too. So, but we did. There are tools out there, Mark, that can allow us to address that. So there are some really nice new risk management tools that we can use and we can learn from other places, and they're very easy to use now, and there's some of them are being used in various countries to prevent certain species from coming in. They have a whole risk management process that they go through. In addition to that, we have a whole series of maps that allow us to, we look at where areas are susceptible to invasion. So we have that as a tool from a technology standpoint also. But getting back to the group that I was in, we had a really nice discussion about technology, and part of that, Jim brought up again the data collection process, and they had a tool called VGS that's used for data collection, and all the groups have the same common data, and so that can help with that trust side of things. There was also a stats program that was built into it, so in terms of being able to interpret those data, there's an advantage there as well. Just the ability to use computers in the field to collect those data and then more easily share them. And I relayed that Lisa Jones, who works with me, we have several rugged computers that we bought used, and they work great in the field, and we didn't have to spend thousands and thousands of dollars on them, and we do some really good work with those. Brett brought up using drones for post-fire management and also riparian management, and one of the benefits of that is by looking at these riparian areas from above, you get that different perspective that you may not. Quite often these riparian areas are a bit taller, and so it's harder to see those. But Brett brought up a really interesting point, and that is looking at these in a time series so that you can see, as you are changing management, are you reaching your goals that you wanted with that management, and then do you need to make adjustments? And so that was really good and showed how we could go from data collection through to making those changes, taking the different road if need be. I think that that pretty much summarizes. And the other thing that Brett mentioned is that they've been doing their own app development, and some of the advantages that they're seeing is that they get the data in more efficiently. There's some error correction that takes place right away. Then they're able to make those corrections, and then it allows them to move into interpretation a lot more quickly.
Great, that's good. We've got just a few minutes left, but Eric, I would like to check in with your group, and then I have just a really big announcement at the end of this. So I just got the news on something. So go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, so certainly remote sensing techniques and drone technology can help us with the technology side and ecological monitoring. But I think our group was really interested in the other aspects that maybe technology could help too, or we need better policies, and we frankly, I think we need more conversation and more communication. Like Katherine said, there was a lot of discussion of how that is an old-time tool, and that's going to be one of the better ones to build trust. And I don't know if there's a way we can shortchange that with technology, but maybe some of the remote sensing techniques we have can help at least get everyone on the same page, even if we're not on the ground all the time.
Yeah, we had a similar discussion about using drones to tell us where to go, not to just replace the on-the-ground boots. So before I go on, I want to thank Brendan and Faith and Maribeth for helping with some of the writing and collecting of thoughts. This was a great session. I hope you can join us tomorrow. Remember that you have been put in the pile for a door prize. We've got some great plant books. One of them is even available as an app. I just have a couple of items from the SRM that I want to make you aware of. So I'm going to share my screen and tell you some exciting news, and then we'll say good evening. Okay, so you should be able to see my screen. There's 3 things I want to say. So these virtual meetings are a kind of a pain, but the SRM 2021 meeting will be virtual. It was supposed to be in Boise, and we just didn't want to waste, have only a few people show up in Boise. So Boise will be in 2023, and we're going to go virtual in 2021. And I'm on the team that is planning this meeting, and we're going to try to make it as interactive, and we're going to bring some really high-level speakers. So that's in February. If you go to the SRM webpage, you can learn more about that. If you want to get involved, let me know, and then put in your mind in 2023 we'll be in Boise. I hope you can join us. Also, we have some really cool FFA events. On the bottom is a picture of a bunch of students who are learning about range. So I appreciate that this discussion about maybe students need to learn these skills when they're in college and high school. And there's about 100 students that are there. And Gretchen Hyde and April Hewlett are involved in putting together the Idaho Rangeland event, which is not this next Monday, but the following. And I'm involved with a few people on the Western National. So we are moving forward on that, and that's really exciting. Now, the really big news that just came in, there was a team of people that put together a proposal for the International Year of Range and Pastoralists. It's about a 4-year endeavor that they've put it together, and I don't know if you knew that it's the UN that declares a year of. The Mongolian government presented it to the COAG yesterday, and it went to the UN, and it was voted without any debate. So the International Year of Rangelands and Pastoralists will be 2026. And I hope to make a big deal of it. It's really cool that rangelands are half of the earth, and they have never been recognized as an international year. So that's my big news. I'm really excited about that. You guys have been really great. I want to thank the SRM for helping with the planning of the meeting and the discussions tonight. So thanks to the Society for Range Management. We are at rangelands.org if you ever want to join this group, which is really about innovation. It's really about trying to share these things across platforms and be innovative. So I'm going to stop sharing. And I want to say that this has been a great group tonight. You will get a little bit of a teaser at the end to give us some feedback in case you have some feedback. Really hope to see you tomorrow. I thought the session this afternoon was great. Really hope to see you tomorrow. And I do hope to rub elbows with you sometime in the near future. So have a really great night and hope to see you tomorrow. Thank you.